Okay, so we'll use a 21X. Now, this is a mold guide. And I set mold guide teeth. I don't order the teeth and then set them. And I don't keep teeth in stock in my office. It's just too expensive to do. Some of the companies have teeth buying programs that you can stock a certain number of very popular teeth. But with the mold guide, what I can do is I can pull these teeth out of the mold guide. I can set them in there. And the shade's not that good. The shade's just a real neuter kind of creamy color. I can send this to the lab to do my wax try-in stage. They can make cores on this, change the teeth out, and send me my mold guide teeth the next day. And then they can set the shade of that 21X that I ordered. Now, we're going to talk later on in the weekend about how to convert from a bioform, bioblend tooth to a creopearl tooth. And I've started using creopearl teeth in almost all my dentures now because they are absolutely beautiful. But I do not have a mold guide for creopearl, and I don't think they make one. So what we have to do is select a bioblend and then convert it to a creopearl. Bioblend shades or bioform shades come in a separate shade coloring, 100, 102, 104, 106, all the way up to 120. The creopearl teeth come in shades A1, A2, like the Vita shade guide. So there again, I would recommend when you're selecting a shade, select not only a bioblend shade, but also select a Vita shade so you can convert to creopearl if you want to. I think the problem with creopearl is once you use them, you can't not use them anymore. You can't go back because they're so beautiful. They're easy to manipulate. They're made out of composite. Willie Geller's the one that came up with them. Really talented technician in Europe who is just kind of the godfather of ceramics. And they're beautiful. And it's the ones that are in your denture.
I wondered.
Yeah, yeah, they're the ones in your denture. And I just really like them. Now, they're not porcelain. They're composite. Same stuff we do white fillings out of. They're composite. And I use porcelain teeth in the posterior. And as the weekend goes on, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about porcelain, plastic, composite, when to use it, how to use it, when not to use it, and that sort of thing. So don't get confused about that right now. So we had selected a 21X tooth to go in here. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to set 2 teeth in that base plate. Okay? I've got my base plate and occlusion rim out of Mr. Bothy's mouth. I've got my 21X centrals over here. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time putting them into the rim, but I'm going to give you some criteria. Before we start to set any teeth, we want to mark on the model the midline. Now let me tell you why you want to do that. Number one, the lab technicians love to have that midline on the model. But if you start setting teeth and you get your midline off, you can always go back to it because it's right there on the model. And so some people will even notch the model with a number 8 round burr. But I think a pencil or a permanent marker will do it. And then when we transfer the midline over to the lower speaking wax, we'll mark it on the lower model end too. Technicians love having that because when they take the teeth out and all the wax is gone, they still have their midline. Thank you, Kathy. Okay. I'm going to go ahead, get this Cottrell spatula hot. I will quote Dr. Jack Turbyfield in saying that you can't go through life with a cold spatula. And you might not like to set teeth, but I think once you start doing it this way and you see how much the patients appreciate the time you're taking and the energy that you're putting into it, it really becomes a fun thing. Get your spatula good and hot. Embed it into the wax and create a molten bed of wax for that tooth. The mistake that I see most people make is they don't remove enough wax and they can't get the tooth in there. I'm going to turn it around for you. Now here's the interesting part of this. You want to make sure that the tooth is flush with the wax rim. You don't want the neck of the tooth sticking out, or you don't want the neck of the tooth embedded in with the incisal edge out. See, we contoured this rim to support Jim's lip, so we want the teeth to do the same thing. We want to push it up to where the high lip line was, and then we'll use a paddle, and we'll make sure that that tooth comes down to the paddle and is touching the paddle. Remember now, we added 1.5 millimeters to this, and so we want to make sure that we've got our tooth long enough. And there it is sitting on the paddle. Can you see that, Dennis? Okay. As I said, very quickly, we'll put a second central in there, trying to hold them right on that midline. At this point, if I wanted to lengthen those centrals like we talked about, I wanted to add 1 millimeter, this is the time to do it. If you'll notice, behind the two front teeth, there's an excess of wax. This is one of the reasons I like to go ahead and set a couple of teeth before we start working with the lowers, because the wax rim is fairly bulky. And if we want to really analyze some speech and speech patterns, then we need to get rid of all this bulk back here. So I'm just going to heat up the wax and melt it down and then scrape it out of the palate. That's something else I'll tell you. When you're making your wax rims, when you do your base plates and occlusion rims, make the rim in the anterior much thinner than the rim in the posterior, and it will much more simulate what a natural tooth feels like to a patient. If you get it too thick and bulky back here, they can't really speak because you're right in the TDS zone. When you say the words TDS, your tongue goes right up behind the front teeth. I'm going to use my paddle and make sure that our centrals are on the paddle. I do a couple of things with the centrals that are a little different. The long axis of the tooth, if you can alter the long axis just a little bit between one central and the other, it makes it a little more natural looking. One of the other, I hate to use the word mistakes, but one of the other challenges that I see in watching people set teeth is when you move a tooth, a lot of times you end up getting the neck of that tooth too far out again. And so you have this kind of hump up under a patient's lip. Now I've got 2 teeth set in there. We can put this right back in Jim's mouth and start to work the lower. We'll look at our high lip line. We'll look at F and V and kind of challenge what we've done. Don't ever let the patient see this. When you've only got 2 teeth set, it's really a very unattractive thing. And don't hand them a hand mirror, because they look like Bugs Bunny with just 2 teeth set in there. It's an awful thing. I made that mistake with a woman one time. She didn't like it at all. Oh, yeah. And I don't think she was ever happy with the damn teeth. But this is just for your verification is all that is. And so we'll slip this back in. I've still got those blue lines on there so you can kind of see where we're working. And what I'd like for you to do is 55.
55.
55.
55.
Very fine.
Very fine.
One more time.
Very fine.
Okay, just let your lips relax a little bit and just let it hang open for me. And you see just the tiniest edge of teeth. Raise the lip up as high as you can. Our high lip line, notice we're not showing really any pink. And our midline, even though his nose kind of goes like that, we've come right down. So we've got 2 teeth in there we can actually start to work with speech and feel pretty good about it. Now there's one change I think you'll probably see that I did while I was working is I went just a little bit farther out with the incisal ledge. I just kicked the incisal ledge out just a little bit. Our wax rim had a little bit of a hawk bill, and it was back a little bit, and I realized that when he was saying 55 and very fine earlier, his lip was having to reach for the wax rim. With this, his lip's not going to have to reach. And when we get the lower speaking wax in, it's going to support the lower lip, and that's how we can start to determine if our lip closure path is going to be okay. So, with 2 teeth set, we're going to start to work our tooth-to-tooth relationship. And so here's our base plate and occlusion rim, or our base plate and speaking wax on the lower. It's 18 millimeters tall, about the width of 2 central incisors. And so we'll try this in, and I'll ask a lot of the same questions. Is that pinching you anywhere? Okay. Now, if a patient's worn a denture for a long time, I kind of will adjust their napkin. I'll let him find that wax. I'll let him kind of feel around and see where it is. If they haven't worn a denture for a long time, this is driving them crazy anyway with all this stuff in their mouth. And so what Jim has been doing is he's been looking for that speaking wax. And here's what I'd like for you to do. Okay? Count from 1 to 10 real fast for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Now you see when he says 6, 7, I want you to notice that wax is banging into those teeth. It's just hitting it. And actually if you look at the wax rim, you can see little marks where those teeth were hitting it. That's an encroachment on the S position. So I don't want to put those teeth there. My question would be, what are my choices? I can move the wax back because if he's moving forward and back too much, he's going to bang into it when he says 66, 66. Could be that it's just too long. We may want to go take a millimeter or 2 off and see if he can clear that S position that way.
66.
Yeah, see, he's working it now. While I've been talking to you, he's been working that wax pretty hard. And he's found a way to actually use it. And that's one of the challenges we have, is a patient that's very adaptable. You could violate a lot of rules, and they could kind of get around it. But I'm not so sure they'd be very happy with your outcome. I want you to be totally comfortable and feeling really good. And so, here's what I'm going to do. You notice that rim and the speaking wax, it doesn't float up and down, it doesn't jump up and down. If it's moving when he tries to talk, go ahead and stick it down with some Fixodent powder. But this one's holding pretty good. Before I shorten it, I'm going to move it back a little bit. And so one of the things I like to do is I like to use warm water to do this instead of a flame. A flame will get it sometimes too hot. And so if I can just gently warm it in water, I can then take my fingers and mold it a little bit. I'm just going to sit that in a little warm water because there's not a lot of wax there. All I've got to do is just take my fingers and lightly push it back. And you can see now I've changed the profile of that wax a little bit. So we drop it in the mouth. Okay, now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Ah. He cleared a little bit better that time, but it's still banging on the cingulums. Okay, ready?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah. He's still hitting it a little bit. I think we're a little long. What we did was, when the wax was out here, it was hitting the incisal edges. When we brought the wax back here, it's now hitting the cingulums. So what that tells me is, positionally, we probably needed to be shorter, not back. So what I'm going to do, and I do this a different way than some people do, I'm going to mark this with my True Bite ruler in 1 millimeter increments, and I'm going to take off 1 millimeter at a time. And so, in an effort not to really mess up my wax, I have been known to heat up a spatula and just do it, but it doesn't give you a nice smooth incisal edge. So what I did was I took off about 1 millimeter One more time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Boom. Did you see it? Can you see it? Come on again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah. And what you're looking for when
66.
66, which is one more time.
66.
I tell you what we might even do. I'm gonna warm it back up and put it back out where it was, because we're getting a nice S sound, but it's not quite crisp. You know, I want it to be really crisp. Okay. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
He's right at it.
66.
He's making a nice crisp S sound.
Cells.
Cells. There you go. The other thing you can look at is he barely touches it, just the tiniest bit, right on the incisal edge. Right on the incisal edge. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to move it back, but I'm not going to heat it to move it back. I'm just going to take that little edge off. Now, have you guys noticed that I have not moved the uppers? I have the option to move the uppers out if I want to and not touch the lower. But I feel good about the position of my uppers, so I want to work with them as much as I can until this takes on a non-anatomic form. If this is non-anatomic, say it's sticking out this way or it's hanging back this way, then I got to go to the upper and move them. But if I like the upper and he's making a nice F and V sound, his high lip line is good, his profile is good, then I'm going to work this as hard as I can to fit it against that. My dad used to have a saying, and it was this: never correct what's right to fit to what's wrong. Always correct what's wrong to fit to what's right. And so if I feel like the uppers are right, then I'm going to keep correcting this to fit to that. Okay, let's go back to the mouth. I've contoured it back just a little bit. Okay, one more time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah. I feel a little bit better about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
66.
Yeah. And I will tell you, he's not moving his mandible forward and back very much. There's this poem that I got from Jack Turbyfield. It's by Rudyard Kipling. And when I feel like we're really close and that the patients are speaking good, they're making their F's, they're making their V's, and they're making their S's, then what I do is I get them to read this poem aloud to me. They quit worrying about their teeth and they start thinking about reading. So it's a more natural way of determining that position.
If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
It's that last "my son." When they can make a whistle, you're right on it. Because you can't say the word whistle without a little whistle.
Whistle.
You hear it?
Yeah.
And so when he got down to the very end where it said, "You'll be a man, my son," he had to go from MM, man, my son. You had to convert your lips to say the S position. 66?
66.
Okay. I feel real good about that position. And what we would do at this point now is we have two options. We want to be able to get this on an articulator. So just with the speaking wax, we can take a bite record, take a Facebow of the upper, and just with 2 teeth set, we can set 6 anteriors, 6 lower anteriors, and put a bite block on it and do a wax try-in. Or, if time allows, we could go ahead and set 6 teeth, try those in right here, work the speech. We can set 6 lower teeth. You can take as much time of this as you want. Typically, this is the way Kathy and I do it. We know the tooth we want. We know the vertical dimension of speech, which is what that S position is. All we have to do is determine the vertical dimension of occlusion, which is putting the joints in centric relation and closing past vertically the vertical dimension of speech, 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters, and have Mr. Bothy come back with the actual teeth, with the creopearls or the bioblends in the shade that we select. But let me show you how all you have to do is set 2 centrals, to an S clearance, put it on an articulator, then you can go back in your lab and take all the time you want to set the teeth. Or what you could do is go ahead and submit it to the lab and have them set the teeth for you. That's the dentist that doesn't like to do a lot of lab work. But at this point, I don't see that as a compromise. So let's get a Facebow and let's show them how to take a bite record using those little bite blocks. Now this is not our final bite record, but it's pretty much our final Facebow until we get to a finalization procedure. So before we make our Facebow registration, I'm going to make some notches in the posterior aspect of our wax rims back here because we're going to use putty on our Facebow. And I want those notches so that we can index and put that denture right onto the Facebow when we have our model on it on the articulator. So I'm going to use a Bard Parker knife, and I'm just going to make some little V-shaped notches in the wax rim. You don't need more than 2, and the putty will record those very accurately. I'm going to put this back in Jim's mouth, let it get in there good. And what Kathy's going to do is she's going to mix 1 scoop of Siltec Lab Putty. Here's the little plastic block that fits on the Coispo. There's the midline. And so I'm going to line up Jim's central incisors that we set with that midline and that little midline cleft that they put right there. We'll put this putty on both sides down into the little indentations, and then I'll put just a little tiny bit in the anterior so those centrals will find a home. What I want to do now is go into the mouth, find my incisal edges, push that right up on the midline, and holding it, I want to make sure that that's being held perpendicular to the plane of occlusion. And that's why I like this little stick down the middle. That putty will take just a few minutes to set. I can push it up there with my fingers, but we're right on it. Siltec putty's got a million different uses, and you'll see that this weekend. But on Facebows for dentures, on Facebows for transfer bases and partials, it's just fantastic. It's clean, it's easy to trim, and it's not nearly as expensive as some of the putties that are used intraorally. When we take that out, you'll notice the denture will come with it, and you can see we got a really nice registration of that. We can take it on and off. It's really very stable. There's our little notches. There's our midline. When we get ready to mount our model, it'll fit right on there. This comes off, and it fits onto a jig in the articulator. And our putty, we can trim it down to make sure the articulator is not impinged upon when we do that. One of the things we want to do now is get a jaw relation. We want to relate the lower jaw to the upper jaw. We've determined our vertical dimension of speech, which is that position when you say 66, 66, condyles are coming down the articular eminence, and so that would be the vertical dimension of speech. What we want is the vertical dimension of occlusion, or what would be an ideal muscle length. We know in Dr. Dawson's book, he talks about the closest speaking method, that the vertical dimension of occlusion, the ideal muscle length, is 1.5 to 2 millimeters inferior to the vertical dimension of speech. So what we'll do with Jim here is we'll put him in centric relation, we'll close down till we go 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters past, and we'll record it right there. We'll put our bite blocks on our little transfer base. What we've done now is we've taken a little dot of super glue and we've super glued these little bite blocks on the posterior aspect of our rim. And the other thing I'd like to show you that you can do is take your True Bite ruler and we'll go ahead and mark on the little piece of speaking wax 2 millimeters down. I'm going to highlight this with that blue marker so you can kind of see it. So that when I'm working and I want to get my vertical dimension of occlusion, I can see as he closes up how far past we need to go. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to ask him to count 1 to 10 for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And what I want to make sure is those bite blocks back there aren't banging into the upper transfer base and occlusion rim when he's speaking. And he clears pretty easily. Now, I'm going to get you to lean your head way back for me now. Open just a little bit and just let your jaw relax for me. And let me close it for you. Come on up, come on up, come on up. Close, 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 close. Unbelievable. That was intentional, by the way. And as you can see, when I close Mr. Bothy up, I can hold him right there. He's right on the blue line, and I can load his joints. I can hold him pretty stable. I can look in the posterior to make sure he's not displacing, turn that way for me now, he's not displacing the transfer base by the upper wax rim. Turn this way for me now. Same thing here. He's not displacing it. And so we're pretty good. I feel good about the fact that we can close him up right to his vertical dimension. So what I'm going to have Kathy do is I'm going to have her mix another little bit of putty. We'll put it on the upper and have him close right into it, and he can hold right there. I can load him the entire time the putty is setting, making sure that we stay bone braced. He's not going to jump on me and waver. Sometimes with patients, this is very difficult to get that repeatable position. Over the years, I've had to treat patients that had different neurological problems, Parkinson's and some of the other neurological, they can't control their muscles that well. And so this can be a very difficult procedure. And sometimes I'll make a bite block in my wax try-in, and I'll just wait and do it then. And I'll make a little mush bite in the back for this. Now I've got my putty over those little transfer bases. I can align his jaw. You notice I've got my hand position. Transfer base isn't moving. I can close him up. Come on up, come on up, come on up, come on up. Hold just like that. Now I'm holding right at the 1.5 to 2 millimeters. That's actually 2 millimeters, which would be his vertical dimension of occlusion. It does come down to the fact that when you're starting to pick those molds and the shades and everything, you got to use a little bit of imagination. You got to use a little bit of your gut feeling about what's going to look good and what's not going to look good. And so one of the things I'd recommend you do next in this process, and particularly if you're just starting making dentures this way, is to do a wax try-in at the next appointment. And a wax try-in with the actual teeth set would really give you the ability to change when it's in wax and verify that you got the right vertical dimension and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Let's go ahead and open for me now. What's interesting is sometimes I can deliver this whole thing in one piece. And there's our record base and occlusion rims, our speaking wax. There's the vertical dimension of occlusion. We can actually put the stone cast in here. We mounted an articulator with the Facebow. And the nice thing about it is we're not really dealing with, there's our little putty records. We're not dealing with a material that's going to distort in terms of the records. So we don't have to deal with wax. Okay? What we're going to do next is we're going to send this off to the lab. We're going to have them convert to the color of the teeth we want. One of the things I like to ask patients is, how white do you want your teeth? I've had a lot of people that will look at me and say, I've always wanted white teeth my whole life. I've never had them, and here's your big chance. And so I'm not judgmental when it comes to that. I can make them what we call TB white. You know what that is? Toilet bowl white. I can get them white, man. And I've had patients tell me that's what I want. These are the different shade guides. I limit all of my activity to the really light shades. I also use a bio blend, which is like a 100, 102, 104. I hardly ever go above a 102. I usually pick 100s for the uppers, 102s for the lower. I stay in all the light ranges. The Creo Pearl is a Vita shade guide. If you've got Vita shade guides in your office, don't ever lose them because they don't make them anymore. And someday they're going to be a rare commodity. I start to stick with the A1 shades, the B1 shades, and if we want to go a little bit darker, we can go the D2. With his complexion, I'd probably stay in a B1, A1 range. Would look pretty good in just about anybody's mouth. That's like a 100 or 102. So I'd probably go with an A1, B1 kind of combination and let the Creel Pearl Shade Guide tell me the rest. And so as we wrap up this second appointment, we've got jaw relation records, we've got tooth position, we've basically recorded the vertical dimension of speech, we've recorded the vertical dimension of occlusion, we've got a good feel for the shade, and what we'll do at our next appointment is a wax try-in. We'll actually try the teeth that we're going to use.